Hello once again and welcome to another shamefully eye-opening episode of What Happened, where we dissect some of the gaming industry's biggest embarrassments, disasters, and bumblestorms. This week, we'll be looking at everyone's favorite spine-ripping, fatality token microtransacting, Western metal meets Asian mythology fusion, Mortal Kombat. But Matt, you scream at your computers in confusion, Mortal Kombat has been a massive success in its 25 years of existence. In fact, 2015's MKX is the highest selling entry in the franchise. So what the Yes, of course. We're not talking about any mainline entries in the series, but rather one of the few red-headed stepchildren that Ed Boon had sired along the way. No, not the god-awful Mortal Kombat Advance. Not the indecipherable MK trilogy for the fucking Gamecom. And yeah, no, not even the infamous MK Mythologies Sub-Zero. No, those are all too good for what happened. There's a Mortal Kombat title out there that has an entire fresco devoted to it that's smeared with crap and shame, the likes of which a Renaissance master couldn't hope to salvage. I'm talking about MK Special Forces. Now let's rewind a bit to the magical time period of 1997. Having developed 4 Mortal Kombat games back to back, the Mortal Kombat team within Midway, led by Ed Beasy and Johnny Tubbs, were looking to expand and do some different things with the franchise. While Ed primarily worked on the arcade release of Mortal Kombat 4, which fully released in the autumn of that year, a companion game was released on consoles a short while later. Yes, the aforementioned MK Mythologies Sub-Zero. Both of these games worked in tandem to try to get over their new villains who were replacing Shao Kahn. These of course being Uncle Fester himself, Quan Chi.
You've done my bidding well, Scorpion, but now I must return you to the Netherrealm. Never!
And silly space wizard Shinnok. Mythologies was produced by John Tobias, and he was the most senior member of the main MK team who was overseeing the project, whose intention was to branch out of the fighting franchise and into an action-adventure title, just to prove to themselves that they could, I guess. Did they succeed? Well, that's up for debate. But the answer is no. MK4 and MK4 Gold for consoles would arrive a year later or so, but between that and the 2002 release of Deadly Alliance, Mortal Kombat had a 5-year gap, except for Special Forces releasing exclusively on the PlayStation in 2000. Now, say what you want about Mythologies, and most people did, but apparently it sold quite well. Sales numbers from that time period are, of course, sketchy, but Midway at least saw fit to push forward with another action game at the very least. Take that as you will. So, Special Forces. It's a 3D level based affair that kinda apes Metal Gear Solid and is based around Major Jackson Jack Spriggs beating up the Black Dragon. And that's about everything you can say. But is it really it? Yes, if this were a normal show. I could certainly just tell you how bad the game is, review it, or whatever, but when an embarrassment and a controversy raise their stinky heads, we will certainly sniff them out. So let's do so, shall we? Despite Special Forces only releasing on the PlayStation, that wasn't the initial plan, at all. It was originally set to also come out on the Nintendo 64 with a Dreamcast port in the cards as well, which makes way more sense. Mythologies released on the N64, and MK4 Gold was being ported to the Dreamcast at the time. This is the first red flag that shit went bad.
This is not a brutality, this is a fatality.
John Tobias did a few interviews with outlets like IGN when the game was early in development and said everything was progressing well. The PSX and N64 versions would be almost identical, as the game would use in-game cutscenes rather than the hammy but hilarious porn parody-esque FMVs, which still stand as Mythology's best feature.
They say the time's supposed to heal ya.
Tobias also went on to detail that the game would play a bit like a mix of Ocarina of Time and Tomb Raider, which is something you heard in every interview around that time, but still was a good indication of what they were going for. He also touted the ability to select 2 different characters, Jax and Sonya Blade, which isn't something that actually happened. Early screens and footage showed this pretty flagrantly, but it was unclear how it would have worked, either akin to RE2 scenarios, or maybe just like any beat-em-up with no changes to the storyline regardless of the character picked. We'll never know. So, there was going to be multiple playable characters, mechanics similar to other big hits of the day, and different SKUs. Then, 2 years later, it was all stripped out and a lone PlayStation version was shuffled out the door for $19.99 with no promotion. So what happened? A lot of things, apparently. Having worked on so much Mortal Kombat for the entirety of the 90s, and with the dawning of the new millennium, also came rumors of new consoles on the horizon. Sony had been, talking about a follow-up to the PlayStation for months, and the Dreamcast still had a potentially okay future at that point.
It's just a little airborne. It's still good. It's still good.
It's good.
I know.
In an interview with Gameological, John Tobias revealed that he got the job to produce Special Forces from his bosses at Midway at an awkward time. The PlayStation and N64 were starting to show their age, and he really wanted to work on new hardware to see his artwork and designs transition to 3D on more powerful machines. Instead, during the critical years of 1999 and 2000, he would be stuck working on a last-gen title just as other developers would be getting a leg up with all the new specs, shinies, and possibilities. Not only that, but Tobias also saw trouble forming within development of Special Forces in general, as this was the team's first fully 3D game, as they wanted to leave the shackles of 2D Mortal Kombat behind them. He was aware that despite strong sales, Mythologies had its head cutted off by critics, and wanted to make something different and obviously better, but it would take a lot more time and a lot more headaches. The breaking point reached when, even after several more months of development, Tobias saw that window of opportunity slipping away. If he was still toiling on this doomed project, he wouldn't be on the ground floor to develop games on next gen and would be at a disadvantage trying to catch up. So, in April of 2000, John Tobias, Dave, and Josh, all from Midway, all quit Midway, and ostensibly Special Forces as well. Usually, when this happens, games are cancelled. Hell, even games that were almost complete and just needed to be printed onto discs were cancelled. But Jax's adventure was still up in the air. It was not outright canned when the announcement of the team's exit broke, and Midway was radio silent over its fate for months more, only revealing that the N64 version was indeed axed. More things got ready for the axe, though, over the next few months, with a consolidated skeleton crew of developers now keeping the whole thing alive, on life support basically. The game's original 7 levels were cut to 5. Fan favorite character Cabal was taken out completely. The camera system, which was originally going to be more behind the back, third person, like akin to Tomb Raider, was changed to a simpler overhead perspective. Climbing and swimming sections were also just scrapped, with just basic locomotion and jumping in their place. With John Tobias at the helm in terms of storyline and such, there was a good shot of Special Forces falling pretty squarely in the MK timeline, but the release version of the game is nebulous at best and confusing at worst. Jax has his super sleek sexy robot sex arms, so this takes place post MK3, but Sonya is never even mentioned in the game despite her being active at this time. Kano is the main antagonist, but Cabal, who was in the early version that Tobias worked on, was not yet scarred, so this might all be happening right before MK3, or right after. Who cares? Special Forces, not surprisingly, is a clunky, dreary mess. The ambition that John and the other members of his team were shooting for all but stripped out for an incredibly basic budget release. It's almost as if it's an American entry in the Simple 2000 series. But hey, its intro is awesome, so that's a good thing. Here is the intro. Now that makes this disaster all worth it, right? If Midway had instead pegged this for an early release on the PlayStation 2, given it the time and budget it needed, it could have been something special.
Yeah, that makes sense.
There was no reason to rush a project like this, considering it was a much more ambitious 3D action adventure, certainly bigger than any other MK game before it. But Midway around this time was great at big, dumb, hilarious mistakes, losing millions and millions of dollars on dead-on-arrival projects like Dr. Muto, Haven Call of the King, and the absolutely disastrous commercial flop Stranglehold, which contributed greatly to the company's demise in 2009. But what about John Tobias? He and other MK team members who left formed Studio Gigante, a massively unsuccessful developer that went on to closure. Unfortunately, there's no silver lining here. Their first release, Tao Feng Fist of the Lotus, despite having some unique features for a fighting game, failed to resonate on the market, despite being a fairly visible Xbox exclusive in 2003. They released one more project, WrestleMania 21, for the Xbox in 2005. And while graphically impressive, it was also critically panned, due to it being clearly a rushed product, as you can see in the footage documented here. The studio closed a year later. Mortal Kombat Special Forces fractured the MK team forever, and it never reformed to include all of its original members ever again. But fortunately, as long as Warner Brothers keeps squeezing us for every single cent it can, MK will still be alive for years to come. That's not great. That's not the best way to do it. But regardless, that's the MK Special Forces saga in a nutshell. If you know of any other disastrous game bungles, let me know in the comments or drop a line at mattmcmuscles@gmail.com. What's up next for Wahapa? I don't know. Maybe a little video that might make you its bitch. See you next time, and thanks for watching.